Och först ut bland våra professorer så vill jag hälsa Terry Walker välkommen, som ska berätta för oss om sin forskning att undersöka det tidigt moderna engelska talspråket. Varsågod.
Okay, so I'll be talking about investigating early modern English spoken language using electronic corpora. Studying the language of past periods. Of course, before we had audio recordings, if we want to study the language of the past, we have to look at written texts. So therefore, if we want to look at spoken language of the past, we're at a disadvantage. But why do we want to look at spoken language of the past? Well, it's particularly interesting is because that's the origin of a lot of linguistic change. And so the nearest we can get to the spoken language of the past is what we call speech-related texts. And these are texts which are written records of spoken language, for example. We have trials, proceedings as one type, witness depositions are another. And the thing is, such texts as these become available in sufficient quantities to allow proper study in English in the early modern period. Now, the need for electronic corpora will become apparent. To be able to draw conclusions on language use, one needs a large number of texts that represent the genre or genres as a whole. And again, I give the examples of trials and depositions. But if we're looking to collect data from early modern England, collecting the data, preparing the data in sufficient quantities takes a great deal of time, especially if we're using manuscript texts. We have to find them, get copies of them, transcribe them perhaps, either have very awkward paper copies with markings on them, or type everything into a computer to be able to search. So it's a lot of work. So what we need is corpora that have been pre-made by researchers for people to do linguistic research. So there was a project at Lancaster University and Uppsala University headed by Dr. Jonathan Culpepper in Lancaster and Professor Mary Kytte in Uppsala, and I was part of this project. And the project was a corpus of English dialogues 1560 to 1760, which we call the CED for short. And this was finally published in 2006. And it comprises 1.2 million words of speech-related texts that are in searchable electronic format. And the genres represented were comedy drama, fiction and didactic works, which are constructed texts written by an author. And then we have trials and depositions, which are texts that are spoken language written down. And to connect to Mid-Sweden University, because I did the previous project at Uppsala, this April we had the 10-year anniversary celebration of the CED by having a workshop in Sundsvall with speakers from all over the world, and their presentations reflected the wealth of research that's been done using this corpus. But there's also a need for an electronic edition or corpus of depositions, because some of the printed editions used in the CED, especially certain deposition texts, they were printed editions of manuscript material, and they were created for historical rather than linguistic examination, and therefore one should check the source material when you're extracting data from the corpus of dialogues for those sections to make sure there are no transcription errors. And as the compilers of the CED, we actually located the manuscripts so they could be checked. And we've written all the information in the guide about how to find these texts. And we also found other manuscript material. And then it became apparent that there would be a great value in creating a linguistic edition of depositions. By linguistic edition, we mean accurate transcriptions, or as accurate as we can do it, with lots of checking each other's transcriptions, etc. Transcriptions that preserve the lineation, they keep the cancelled text, they keep the abbreviations, they don't write them out, no text omissions, no added text. So it became apparent that we needed this material. And the result was, in 2011, an electronic text edition of depositions, 1560 to 1760, or ETID, as we call it. And this was done again by Professor Marikuto in Uppsala, myself, and Peter Grund in Kansas University. And this edition is texts which are as faithful to the language and the layout of the manuscripts as is possible in electronic format. At this point, perhaps, I should say, well, what is a deposition? I'm talking about something I haven't explained what it is. Well, depositions are written records, naturally, and they're taken down by a scribe as the witness is giving their spoken testimony, usually before the court case is actually in court. And it can be different types of courts, such as civil courts, church courts, or criminal courts. And most of this material is preserved as manuscript. So next question then is, why would we be interested in these texts? Well, the beauty of depositions is that they provide us with these glimpses into the everyday life and language of the period that we don't find in many other texts, as well as giving us information on the dealings, the cases, and the procedures of various courts. And what's very important for us is that those giving testimony comprise both men and women, and from all echelons of society. And many texts in the early modern English period are written by men. The people in the texts are largely men rather than women, and it's usually the middling and upper ranks that are represented. In depositions, you get a lot of commoners represented, so you get somehow closer to the real early modern England. Going back to the text edition that we produced, there are 905 depositions in this edition/corpus. And these depositions come from the north, the south, the east, and the west of England, and also from London. It covers a 200-year period, and unusually, it's available in 5 different formats. And the reason we did it in 5 different formats is because we saw that people would have different research needs. So we have the HTML version, which you see here on the screen. This is a browser version, and it's intended for reading through to getting a feeling of the material. And what we've done here is the blue part is editorial comments. That's the bits we've added. But it's mostly limited to page references and references to the scribe. In green, we have foreign language, which is usually Latin, because Latin was often used to introduce the witness. And the red is direct speech. Clearly, the testimony by the witness would have been in first person, but the scribe usually changes it to the third person. So only occasionally do we get direct speech, and that's usually when the deponent is citing someone from an earlier speech event. And so you get a feel of what's actually going on in the street. Also here you can see that we've, if I can see it without my glasses on, here for example, we've got a special character that stands for ES or IS. Up here is another symbol which stands for PRO, pro. And we've actually, because we want to keep it close to the manuscript, we've had these images created especially for this project. And it was Niels Lennart Johannesson at Stockholm University who created these special characters for us. The PDF version is simply the same thing, again, only it's in black and white, and it's created so that people can print the texts. The XML version, well, I guess you all know that XML is totally unreadable. So that was actually the format we used to create the other formats from. We don't actually use that for anything else. But other computer whizzes might be able to use that for something. Otherwise, we have the resolved XML, which simply means the XML with the special characters written out. So instead of crazy coding, you get PRO for that P character, for example. And that is, we've got that version so people can use search programs such as Zyra. I myself prefer the TXT version, which is the plain text file, and I use that with the program Wordsmith, for example. And here, just out of interest, I've got you the manuscript copy of that deposition there. So you can see, well, you probably can't see, but I'll tell you that we've kept the lineation and the special characters and the missing text and the abbreviation marks, etc. So the project ETID was seen as a combination of corpus linguistics and philology. And here I give you a big advert for the project. The ETID CD not only offers the 5 formats I've mentioned for different research needs, but we also include software for computer searches. We've included word lists, word counts, information on the deponents, and also a guide to the material and a glossary of archaic and dialect words. We've even included manuscript images to show a kind of cross-section of the scribal hands we have. We could only afford to have 34 of the 905 depositions in image. And the book that contains the CD gives an introduction to the genre. It gives the historical and legal context, and it also has a variety of linguistic explorations of the material. And in so doing, we embrace a number of fields such as manuscript studies, editorial theory, historical linguistics, as well as political, social, and legal history. And in addition to the editors, myself, Mariekita, and Peter Grund, several experts in corpus and computational linguistics, historians and archivists were also involved. I've already mentioned Niels Lennart at Stockholm. We also had Gregory Garretson at Uppsala, who did a lot of the tweaking with the XML and those things that I don't really understand. And historians and archivists in England were very helpful also. And we think that the ETID project illustrates how an interdisciplinary and a collaborative approach is perhaps the way forward. So finally, to get to research, how am I doing? A minute, 2 minutes left? I'll just whiz through this then. Using the CED and or ETID, most of the research has been on language variation and change. I did my PhD thesis on second person singular you and thou, and I've also studied that in ETID, and it shows, for example, that thou remained in certain regions when it fell out of use in others. We've also looked at third person plural was and were, where were is the norm and was would be the dialect form. I've also studied the us and th inflection on the third person singular present tense, and that shows some interesting patterns. It shows how depositions were lagging behind in the change, but if you look at the spoken parts, where you've got the direct speech in the depositions, there was a lot more of the new form in that part than there was in the other parts. One of my MA students did his MA thesis using ETID for a study of do construction. We also have a PhD student at Uppsala now finishing his licentiate on oaths and discourse markers using the CED. We've also looked at manuscript layout features, and now we're working on speech presentation, looking at the uses and distribution of indirect versus direct speech and mixes of the two. So thank you very much for listening, and here's my references.
Väldigt intressant. Om du stannar en stund så har vi tid för någon fråga.
Bra.
Om det är någon i publiken eller om vi får något sms. Så tittar vi ut och runt. Men jag måste få ta chansen först och ställa en fundering. Du beskriver här att ni har tagit de här domstolsbeskrivningarna från stora delar av England. Och min erfarenhet från Hälsingland, där man har tittat på sådana här saker också, så förstod man ju, var det byar som var allt för långt ifrån, så förstod man ju nästan inte vad den andra sa. För det var så mycket dialekt.
Ja.
Har ni stött på det här bekymret? För jag menar, England är ju ett stort land, och att jämföra då de här
Det finns
domstolsutskrifterna.
många som det går inte att förstå när man läser första gången.
Det måste ju vara ordet. Ja.
Men okej, vad menar det? Men det kan också vara misstag när de skriver ner. Så det är både två som gör det lite svårt att förstå ibland. Jag vet inte om jag kan visa från början kanske.
Jag funderar också på påverkan av att det här är domstolshandlingar. Att blir det ett tillrättalagt språk utifrån domstolen, eller är det, tror ni, återgivet? Men
eftersom de är vittnesmål, inte
så blir det
protokoll, det är bara skrivet så här. Det är inte riktig dokument alltså. Många slängdes efter. Så vi har inte så många kvar om man jämför med protokoll.
Väldigt spännande att höra hur man får ihop det här på det sättet. Och skulle vi slutligen kunna få ett språkligt exempel på hur lät man ungefär om man säger en mening 1700-tals engelska?
Jag kan inte uttala det så, men om jag kan läsa på det här till exempel. John Ross blah, 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 and said, "Father, what do ye sitting here and see them brag you as they do?" And at that word, the said Ralph said to the said Ross, "What saith thou, slave?" To whom Ross answered, "Sir, what by yourself?" And det var intressant för mig eftersom det var you and thou där. Så.
Ja, jätteintressant. Tack så väldigt mycket. Är det någon som har en fråga i det här läget? Då tackar vi dig, Terry, så otroligt mycket för den här presentationen.
Jag tar av nu. Hjälp.
Vilken fadäs. Det är bara att erkänna. Vi får väl säga att det här, i och med att du är först ut, men nu kommer ingen att göra om samma misstag. Jag vill naturligtvis överräcka en liten present från Mittuniversitetet och tacka för det här föredraget och önska dig grattis och välkommen som professor i gänget.